Hey guys, this is the Bart Show. My name is Bart Baggett, and I'm on a quest to look for the world's most interesting people. And Marc Eliot, you might just be one of the world's most interesting people.
Well, it's very kind of you to say so. I've been called a lot of things.
But not,
Interesting is good.
interesting is good, right? Well,
Yes.
the reason I wanted you on the show is you not only are interesting yourself, but you've made a career out of exploring and finding the most interesting people and then writing books about them.
Yeah.
Like, so you're a premier expert in Disney and Merle Haggard, and tell me all the other people. I mean, you've been doing this forever, right?
Forever. Cary Grant, Jimmy Stewart, Steve McQueen, Jack Nicholson.
Wow.
Uh, um, uh, the list is so long. Donna Summer, um, Barry White,
And when you get to, so I had the luxury of you said Gary Stewart and
Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart. I had the luxury of meeting Jimmy Stewart at Pepperdine when he was like 80, and I was in college, and he gave a speech, and I was just like in awe of magnificent talent. And some of them don't last long and they pass away. And I was just so privileged to even just hear a speech. But you got to get with his people and talk and
That's right.
figure out who the man really was. Of all the famous people you've met, which one really stands out as inspiring as like a human being that's really made a difference on the planet?
Well, they all have different aspects to their greatness. I like offbeat people because I find them much more interesting and compelling. You know, when you talk to people about their favorite movies, let's say, everybody has the same first five movies:
Right.
Vertigo, Citizen Kane, The Searchers, but the action is in the 20th film, 25th film. And that's kind of what I like when you get to talk to people who aren't standard issue stars. So I guess I would put Cary Grant up there. I certainly would put Merle up there. I would put Phil Oakes up there.
Phil
Uh,
Oakes. That's a name I'm not familiar with.
he was a political folk singer in the '60s in Greenwich Village,
Oh, wow.
and he's actually how I began my career was I knew Phil. He was an interesting guy, very talented. Got caught up in politics, left wing politics,
Uh-huh.
ruined his life with
It ruined his career because politically he wasn't
ruined his
bookable. He
career.
wasn't bookable.
He wasn't bookable.
Interesting.
He wasn't commercial. Very talented. Um, Passed away very young. He's a good friend of mine. I grew up in that village scene, and I decided to write about him before somebody
Is that the Lenny Bruce era, or that's the Lenny Bruce a little bit before that era?
just after Lenny Bruce. It's
Because,
Bob Dylan.
yeah.
It's that period, the first 5 years of the
But you're a kid. You're
60s.
in your 20s. You're
I'm a baby.
writing.
Yeah,
Are you writing for local newspapers, or you're just finding your roots?
I was writing short pieces for magazines. I was going to school. I was actually in high school when I met Phil. I went to the High School of Performing Arts, which is known as the Fame School.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because in my early years, I was a child actor, and any actor will tell you, and I acted up until my 20s, that most of the material that they have to act is awful.
Right, right, right. I remember I did the Danny Bonaducci show years ago in Chicago. He is a child actor, and so many child actors have a hard time making your transition.
Well,
But
that's
they're
for
not
sure.
giving you hard material. They're giving
Right.
you. They just hope you get your line right, so they can put the laugh track in back in the '70s.
You mentioned Danny Bonaducci. I babysat for
You did
him
not.
at one point when he was a kid. He was going to private school in New York,
Right.
and I was any job I could get to, pay my rent.
Sure.
So they said, "Well, can you tutor? Can you tutor a young kid?" I said, "Sure." In what? Whatever, English. Go talk to him about English. So I went to a hotel room because he was doing
Sure. Some show.
some show, and I went in there and I said, "Okay, I'm going to tutor you." I don't want to tutor. Let's talk about baseball. Yeah, Danny is, and we became very friendly. It was a fun afternoon. He was still a young, cute, kid.
I always liked him. I always enjoyed doing his show, and
Yeah,
he was a little bit like Howard Stern. He just could push the envelope a little bit,
a
and
lot.
I also like quirky people. I love people that just think outside the box, willing to take risks, and sometimes it gets them in big trouble.
If they care. I remember when Howard Stern got fired from NBC in New York. It was on the front page of the New
It
York
was a big
Post.
deal.
Huge, because at the time, not so much now, but at the time, he was really on the edge.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes over the edge, yelling at his general manager, criticizing the station. They wanted him to play 3 songs an hour, and I'm not playing anything. I just everything you could think of.
Yeah, if you're, I have a lot of listeners in India. If you're not familiar with Howard Stern, there's a movie called Private Parts, and it's a very nice, well acted, scripted, kind of documentary type film.
Yeah,
And as I watched that, because I did 1,500 morning radio shows as I was coming up through the business as an author, I got to know all those people, and I call some of them my friends, and I just so empathize with the general manager and the talent and trying to do things that are interesting in these suits, trying to tell you what you need
exactly.
to do. And and even as a comic, you have the same structure of like, is I'm allowed to say it? Am I going to get fired, or is this okay? Even last night on this stage, I'm like, is this joke okay? I'm not sure. You got a bunch of people with guns here.
You're only good if you're talent. If you're management, they're not talent. So it's for them to for non-talent to tell talent what is good, what is funny, what is usable is insane. What they should do, and they never do, to sit back and say, go for it. And that's, he was all about that. Now, I think mainstream success tamed him down a little bit.
You mean Howard?
Yeah,
Well, also remember he's on a satellite network.
right.
So when there's no boundaries, there's nothing to push.
That's right.
Hey, you can say whatever you want. You can bring whores, hookers, whatever. And he's like, what's the fun in that?
If it's okay, what's
It's not that interesting, right? Let's talk about Meryl Haggard. I grew up in Texas, and I didn't even like country music until I had to California, and I bought my first pair of boots in El Paso driving to California, and then I started liking country music. And I'm like, this is weird. I grew up in country music, and now I'm just a huge fan. But I feel like I missed some of those amazing greats from the 60s and 70s, 80s, because I was just a kid,
And
Dwight Yoakam was one of those crossover artists. I was like, why do I love him so much? It's because he has these roots in these amazing country and western, they call it in the U.S. music scene.
But Dwight's from Kentucky, and he was inspired to go to the West Coast because of Merle,
I didn't know that. I thought his hero was the one he sings about in the song,
Buck Owens.
which is amazing. I love the Buck Owens Palace. I love that genre, and I still wear these cute. I'm a dork. I'm sorry.
Merle and Buck and Bonnie Owens were the Bakersfield sound. They came from Bakersfield, which is North California.
Yeah.
And it was a major stop for big country stars, even though it was a small oil town and farming town. And the reason was they would country stars would play Vegas, the old Vegas,
Sure.
the little honky tonks and the whiskey bars, and then they would drive to Los Angeles. But the stopover, the midpoint, was Bakersfield. So they
Got
would
it.
stop, pick up a gig in Bakersfield, and then go down to record, usually at Capitol Records.
Right.
Where they had the
Have you
best
been to the
facility.
basement of Capitol Records?
Oh yeah, I mean,
I don't know how you can explain that to people to have walk around and seeing the pictures of Elvis and these studios, which look just like out of the 1960s, this rich wood
they
and
are out
the
of
Beatles. It's like a time capsule.
The Beach Boys.
Oh,
And also their country music division was the only alternative to Nashville.
it's true.
So somebody asked Merle, what's the difference between Nashville country music and Bakersfield? And Merle said, Nashville country music comes out of the church.
Mm.
Bakersfield country music comes out of the bars. And in that sentence, he got it. I mean, he
It
nailed
totally
it.
captures it.
Totally. And that's really what it was. He and Buck, although they didn't really know each other, although Merle was in Buck's band for 3 weeks.
So they
And-
kind of cross paths.
they crossed paths, but before Merle hit it big, Buck asked him to be in his band. Merle didn't. They didn't mesh. I think Merle was too much of an individual and wanted to do his own thing, but he did one thing for Buck, that is legacy. And when he left the band, he said, "You ought to call them. You ought to call your guys the Buckaroos," and that's how they got their name.
Oh, that's
And he
interesting.
did it as almost like an insult. Call your guys the Buckaroos. And Buck Owens said, "Oh, great! That's what I'll do." So these guys, and the other interesting thing about Buck and Merle is that Buck was married to Bonnie Owens, and that's where she got her last
Wait,
name.
Buck Owens, Bonnie Owens, Merle. Merle was married to Bonnie Owens?
After Buck.
Oh, so they shared a wife, not at the same time, Ness.
Not at the
Who
same
knows?
time.
I'm not judging.
And well, but think about it, a little bit of tension could arise from that, because Buck never really got over Bonnie, and Merle was not crazy about Buck.
Right. And he's now married to his
I
ex.
got your wife. And,
Oh, that had to hurt a little.
well, I heard a lot, I would think. But here's the kicker. Here's how Buck got even. He bought Merle's publishing for nothing.
His rights.
The rights to his music.
Oh, that's a backstab.
And paid him almost nothing. And when Merle used to come and say, "I need money," Merle always needed money. I need $15,000. Buck would say, "Well, sell me another song. Give me another song." And all those songs became huge hits. Mama Tried.
He got a little royalty, but Merle got the big money because he owned the publishing house, right?
Buck got all the money.
He got a little money for writing the song.
A little money.
Okay.
Performance money, they call it.
And it was very different back then. It wasn't quite as
No.
managed, and the ASCAP and all the unions the way it is now.
He
Still's not easy musician, but then
Merle made most of his money performing on stage. That's where he made his money.
so I think it's so funny that he took a man's wife and then he's indebted to him.
For the rest of his life.
That's got to be so painful.
Well, that's
Can
country
you
music.
imagine?
I mean, that's that
Hat in
country
the
life.
hand, sir. And about 20 years later, he's looking at her going, "This is some expensive ass."
Well, yeah. Merle had a song, and he desperately needed money, and Buck knew it. So Buck anticipated Merle coming in with his hat.
Right.
He had a check in his drawer for $35,000 made out to Merle. Merle came in and said, "I need $15,000. Buck said, "I'll give you 10 in cash." Merle said, "Okay," took the 10,000, left. Buck took the check out and tore it up. So he was prepared to give Merle 35,000, got away with 10.
He
He was a
he
businessman.
did steal his wife. That's a lot of pain you got to
There are
get
some
over.
places, some lines you can't cross.
Apparently. So tell me about Merle as a person. I'm looking at his writing, and he seems to be balanced and optimistic and level-headed. A lot of country music stars get into drinking. They obviously women, and they get into the nightlife is challenging. If you're on the road and there's
That's right.
alcohol everywhere, I don't see a lot of self-destruction. What I'm looking at here, maybe sensitive to criticism, maybe feel like people are attacking him, maybe feel like people are a little paranoid. What was he like as a human being? And did you ever meet him, interact? And do you know, like,
Well,
on
I
a
met
personal
him. I
level?
knew him. He was on a one-to-one level. He was great. He was polite, friendly, interested in what you had to say. But his life was so difficult for him. He was very close with his dad. His dad was a musician, played the fiddle, married a woman back in Oklahoma, and she was a Christian
Okay.
woman. Once they got married, she forbade him to play the fiddle anywhere but in church. So
he allowed his wife to dictate his musical
Jim,
creativity.
the father.
The father. Okay, got it. Yeah.
So Merle was the third child. and he came 17 years later. So the first two were up and gone,
Right, right.
and then they had a miscarriage before Merle. And the mother thought, well, this is a message from God that we did something wrong. We're being punished. So no more children. And then eventually she got pregnant again, had Merle, and she believed that God had forgiven her and that Merle was a special child.
Did Merle believe he was special?
No,
Did he believe he was gifted? How did he? How do you get from like just a kid to go? You know what? I'm going to be a superstar.
never entered his mind.
He just wanted to make a living and play music.
He just was interested in women and women. He was
Well, that apparently got him in big trouble later in life.
his whole life. You know, as I say, he was very close to his father. His father died when Merle was 9, and Merle, like a lot of kids, blamed himself because a month before the father died, Merle was very sick, and he thought somehow that sickness killed his father.
Oh, that's sad. The kids have those weird, strange things.
Yeah. So he acted out his guilt by being a juvenile delinquent. And there was only one judge in Bakersfield at the time, and Oildale, which is right next to it. Merle was arrested 17 times
As a child?
as a teenager.
Wow, he was a troublemaker.
Same judge. Finally, this judge got so fed up that he said, "You're going to San Quentin
Oh, that's a serious big prison.
for 30 years." Boom. 19 years old. His biggest crime was stealing a car and trying to rob a restaurant while it was open. His kids.
He's not a very good criminal,
No.
but he was ambitious.
He could play the guitar, always could play it because his father was a musician. And he learned early on that if you get up on stage, you get a lot of attention and you get all the girls. And when he was
I've
younger,
always thought musicians, the only motivation was getting women. I've always
course.
secretly thought that. Talent, it's not so much.
it's just a way to get girls. And he looked like James Dean when he was younger.
Super young.
Just a handsome guy. So in San Quentin, he would collect all the orange peels at dinner when they would serve the dinners. And he made a still in his cell, fermented the oranges, and was selling bootleg
Liquor.
whiskey and was making a fortune.
I don't know why he was broke his whole life. He seemed to be very creative.
Very creative guy.
I'm going to wrap it up, but can you come back? But on the show later. I want to talk about Walt Disney. I want to talk about
Absolutely.
all these interesting people. I love these stories, and I wish I could spend like 6 hours with you. It's really fascinating. When
Let's
does the
do it.
book out? Can we get it now? Give us a little
It's
plug for our
out now.
listeners.
It's called The Hag. It's the definitive biography. I spoke to everybody who was alive, close to Merle, Ken Burns, everybody. And Merle's best friend, who's now one of my close friends.
Right.
It's if you want to know who Meryl Haggard was, if you think you know who he was, I promise you, you don't. And if you want to learn about what his music was
Right.
and why he wrote and sang, you should read.
I think you should buy it because Marc Eliot tells great stories. Mark, thanks for being on the show, brother. Please come back.
Thank you. Anytime.